Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I am talking with Alix E. Harrow about her books, Starling House in particular, which is out October 3rd. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
So clearly, I love your books. I love how you write and the lyricism and the stories that you tell. So thank you.
Okay, that's all the compliments. The compliment portion is now at an end.
Oh, good.
Only questions from here on out.
Well, okay, so can you tell us a little bit about what Starling House is about?
Yeah, I think the elevator pitch I'm settling on as we head into like promo season is Southern Gothic Beauty and the Beast. But in my heart, it's more of a Kentucky Gothic because I actually think of it as a more specific subgenre than that. I think when you say Southern Gothic, people think of Spanish moss and the Deep South and um, certain kinds of narratives. And this one is very much sort of rooted in my own childhood and experience growing up in Western Kentucky.
Okay. So when you say Gothic, what do you mean in particular here?
I'm so excited to talk about genre. I actually love talking about the Gothic as a genre because it's so weird and shapeshifty and older than people think. And I think when you say Gothic to people, if you said it to 10 different people, they would have 10 different ideas of what you were talking about. Because it's such a nebulous, cool genre that has included everything from fantasy to horror to high literary to historical. So it's like a real weird genre that I love. I think I am trying. Well, I am not going to say I succeeded, but I'm trying to fly right in the middle between like the paperback gothic romances of like I want to say post Rebecca, where there's like a woman in a white dress fleeing from a house and there's like a dark, terrible man, like those, and like more traditional classic like Southern Gothics, like your Jasmine Wards and your Toni Morrisons, and yes, even your Faulkners.
So you set the mood very well here, which is sometimes hard to do with Gothic because it can feel like you're too pouty sometimes, but or like it's easy to miss the mark, is all I'm saying. So that's got to be like something you do over and over in edits is like refining these things.
I almost start with vibes though, or at least I do think like the aesthetics and the tone and all these things together that is explains the popularity of the word vibes because it just sort of encapsulates all those things. But like whenever I start a new book, I'm kind of thinking about like what literary traditions am I talking to? What's the tone? What kinds of descriptors do I get to use? Like, because all those little choices of language as you draft, I want to have some sort of like rails, some sort of guideline for like what I get to choose from. And so with the Gothic, I read a bunch of Southern Gothics, and me and my youngest brother, who was an engineer, so he did the hard work, built the Southern Gothic bot when Twitter was still alive. I don't know if you remember Twitter. It used to be the social media app. No.
Back in
uh,
your day.
but back in my day, in my youth, and it every 4 hours would tweet like a fake line that sounded like it came from a Southern Gothic because I made like this elaborate spreadsheet of like the kinds of adverbs and the kinds of nouns that would be used, so like forsakenly and moldering and like all these things. And it worked surprisingly well, which tells you that like there is an established aesthetic playbook that Southern Gothic writers get to pull from. So in some ways, that's the least inventive thing.
Finding those words sometimes though is like tricky. And not overusing them, I think.
Yeah, you only get to use the word feral once a book, which I think is unfortunate, but they will arrest you if you use it more than once.
um so the setting itself is so beautiful too because it's this small like very kind of empty town, Eden, in the deep South. Well, not the deep South. I don't know what Kentucky is. In Kentucky. So how do you capture Southern Gothic and kind of mix it with Kentucky Gothic?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, in both sides of my family are from Kentucky from way back, and I grew up on a farm in Allen County and then later in Grayson County. So a lot of this is straight up stolen. Like, and then I lived for like 7 years in Eastern Kentucky. So there's little pieces there from those towns, like the sheer number of Dollar Generals, the Hardee's that was turned into a Mexican place. Those are real things. But also I pulled a lot from actual history. So like one of the main inspirations for the book is the actual story of Paradise, Kentucky. Have you heard of Paradise, Kentucky? Do you know John Prine?
I don't think so.
This is a very specific, weird history. This is a John Prine mug. That I think I thought was more universal than it was when I started writing this. But I grew up listening to John Prine. He's kind of a classic, like folk singer, alt country kind of a thing, kind of one of the great songwriters, I would say. Um, not to whatever. And his family is from Muhlenberg County, Kentucky, where this book is set. And his first really, truly big song um, is called Paradise. And it's because his parents are from Paradise. And it is the story of the ecological disaster that unfolded there, which is that the TVA built the largest coal-fired power plant in the world there in 1962. And they had the largest steam shovel in the world because Muhlenberg County has a really incredible vein of anthracite coal. And so the entire county was strip mined. And the coal plant was so disgustingly foul that by 1969, which I think you have to take a moment to appreciate, the ecological standards in 1969 were not high. So imagine how bad it would have had to have been before there was a response. So in 1969, they had actually relocated the entire everyone who lived in Paradise, Kentucky, and bulldozed the remains of the town so that all that there is now in Paradise, Kentucky is a graveyard. So that is what the song is about. It was only a couple counties away from where I grew up. Like my dad, when he was a kid, got to ride in that steam shovel and stuff. So it's this very like old narrative to me. And so obviously I named my town Eden, Kentucky. You see what I did there?
Mm.
And it's almost like a what if, or like a if that town had survived and what kinds of things would haunt it.
So that kind of brings in this idea of like the book centers on a coal mining town, and there are like mining shafts that are derelict. I come from a mining area, so like one of our towns is just collapsing in on itself, like these types of things. And it feels real. So like it really feels like you've been to these places and you're just telling us what they look
I
like.
mean, so I did take a lot of liberties because
Yeah.
most of the mining that was in Muhlenberg County more recently, like since the 60s, has been straight up strip mining. So there's no mine
Yeah.
shafts. They're just
Yeah,
taking the
that's
whole topsoil off. Right, exactly. But my mom is from Eastern Kentucky in Lawrence County. And so like that side of the family did the actual going down the mines and had sort of a series of horrible events. So like I never met my mom's dad because he was hit by a coal train when she was little. And then my mom's grandfather was hit by a coal truck before that. So it's like this whole like weird coal history in my family. So I kind of liberally stole from all of that to make like the horror of a tiny coal town.
one of my favorite characters is Big Jack, which is the shovel, right? The big mining shovel that dies. Is
This is all true. That's all true. There was this enormous, unbelievably huge steam shovel. I mean, they have built bigger ones now, but at the time it was just like, it's multiple, it's like 25 stories high. It had to be built on site. And then it like when it was decommissioned finally, mostly because there was no topsoil left in Muhlenberg County to take, they had it dig its own grave, like a huge hole, and then just crawl in. And that's where they buried it. And that's an ecologically sound principle, I guess. And the actual name of it, I changed it to Ajax because I was doing like a whole Greek mythology thing. They actually called it Big Hog, which has a lot more
uh,
gross Kentuckiness to it, I think.
well, I like Jack. So, it was just like so it was just like a small little layer, right? And this book is full of layers. Like it is just layer on top of layer on top of layer. And then at one point, it's mentioned this image of the Mississippi River and all the tributaries that used to go into it. And I was like, yeah, this is like the perfect analogy.
Have you looked up that map ever?
No.
Someday I'm gonna order prints of it because it's truly one of the most beautiful maps I've ever seen. It's like the Mississippi River overlaid by all of its different iterations, like the course it used to have. And it's useless, I think, as a map, but as a visual, it is gorgeous. But I was trying to do one of the things that happens when you read a lot of Southern Gothics, especially back to back, is you begin to see how they are all different versions of the truth, and that those who is telling the story greatly affects what the version of the story is. Um, and so I was trying to have something where you could see all of the overlapping narratives of a space through different eyes. Like there's the Wikipedia version, there's the town lore version that you would tell on a back porch, there's the transcript, there's the historical record, like all these different things. So that was the goal.
It adds really well to this Gothic vibe, though, because each story is told by different people who have different experiences in this town. And Opal, the main character, is just taking it in, and she's just like, so this is the truth, right?
But what is the truth, right? And I think that's one of the fun, but also most compelling things I think about the Gothic as a genre is that, like, when you look at particularly Southern Gothics, and I'm obviously talking about writers of color versus white writers versus men versus women and queer writers, they do very, very different things with the history of the South. And so the overtone of horror in like a classically white male Southern Gothic is what was lost. There's this nostalgia for the past often. And that's the horror, is like, look what we have become. And the horror in most other narratives comes from, look at what we have always been and what we were, and we still kind of inherit. And I think playing with those two together is really, really satisfying.
It worked so well in this story because it's you're throughout most of the beginning of the book, you're building this ambiance of what's happening and like who are these people. And so having everybody tell a different story about what the Starling House is and who um, the first Starling woman was, whose name I'm completely blanking on.
Worry about it.
It just like added to how, I guess, just the gothicness of it, right? So like when you're told in various stories, oh, don't go up to the attic, or don't and you're like, oh, but why?
Well, I think that's part of, I think, just general horror, which I'm not a huge horror person. Like, I feel like a few people have read this book and been like, this wasn't scary at all. And I'm like, I know, I'm a chicken. I could never. This is absolutely as scary as I get. And it is functionally the Target like Halloween aisle version of horror. But I think what good horror does is very much destabilize your sense of the truth, right? So like you're supposed to be constantly questioning where the threat is and like who the bad guy is.
For a long time I was pretty convinced it was Arthur, the boy she meets in the house, just because he's like, I will pay you a lot of money. Come hang out
It's a
with me.
threatening thing to say. It's not good. And I think I think romance and horror both have a take on mysterious man in a big with mysterious source of wealth and a big old house. Romance is generally like, I'm interested, you have my attention. um, and horror is like, he definitely has a wife in the attic, but clearly, even in that example, is that a romance or is that a horror novel? I think the vibes cross very well there.
It did set up their relationship, which uh, it took a while to get to them being comfortable with one another, which built up tension very, very well. But I love that she's annoying him throughout.
That's important to me. I think that's representation for annoying people.
She's just humming and like rearranging his stuff, and like, I will probably would have fired her first day when
Yeah,
when she
unless
stopped
you were
humming.
like crushingly lonely.
um, So, how did you choose Opal and Arthur as the two mains, right? So, Opal is this homeless kid, kind of, and Arthur is this brooding, dark soul.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I don't know. It's honestly been a while. They were pretty early in the process of thinking of this. For Opal, I mean, I kind of knew from the beginning that what I wanted to write about was like the idea of home, partly because I was moving away from Kentucky for the first time, and I was all up in my feelings about my home and both my nostalgia for it and my all my reasons for leaving. So the idea of home was going to be very important. And then that sort of necessitated a character who doesn't have one. You know, I wanted it very much to be a journey towards one or finding one or redefining it. So the opposite of that is like, you know, living in a motel. And a sense of tenuousness and unbelonging. And so like she kind of was built out of her circumstances. Arthur, I will admit, is from rereading Wuthering Heights around this. You know, the Gothic tradition has a rich field of brooding men. And I don't want to upend the genre. I respect the brooding man. I especially respect him when he is broken down. You know, you want to unmake him.
Yeah. And when he has good reasons for things, or seemingly good, like to him, they're good.
To him, they're good. Pretty weak overall from an outsider perspective. A lot of different approaches could have been taken there, but someone that you can empathize with.
Yeah. I love that so you included cell phones for one, which has got to have been difficult in a gothic horror. Because I'm like, how do you include modern technology in this like setting alone?
Yeah, actually, I mean, because I've written a lot of historical fiction. My other two full-length books are historical. And so like there was this huge urge. I kept being like, shouldn't I just set this in 1940? Um, but a couple things stopped me. The first of which is that one of the things I find myself a little bit frustrated with the way the South, but especially Kentucky, is represented in fiction and film is that it's sort of in the permanent past. Like there is like authentic Kentucky stories often have this sort of patina of like, you know, the working mining man, and it never really gets past like the 70s, you know? And I wanted to see the contemporary South that I grew up in. Like this is largely my childhood, a little bit later, but pretty close. Um, but also there's a level of horror that is present in Kentucky in historical times that I did not feel like I was the correct writer to deal with, and I did not want to wade into. Like I wanted to grapple with the home that I knew and was missing, and not with all of its past iterations.
You do touch on stuff though, like the fact that the miners were slaves is like very pertinent and hardly ever talked about.
I mean, I do think definitely the Southern Gothic, but also the Gothic as a genre. There's a solid academic argument to be made that that genre and that horror itself evolves at the moment that the transatlantic slave trade is at its peak, and it's a sort of grappling with like the darkest of humanity. I don't think that you should write anything set in Kentucky or the American South that is like, oh yeah, enslavement wasn't a big deal here. Like it has to be a part of it. It is necessarily a part of it. And the more you look at each thing, like it's not like I had to go out of my way. That is just the literal truth. The first mines off the River were mined by enslaved people. The town was founded by a man who owned people. That is just the truth. So it would be actually functionally very, very fucking weird. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your show.
You're fine.
If you were to remove that, you know what I mean? Like that's just what actually happened. And I think
Yes.
that was one of the things that bummed me out, not bummed me out, but complicated this narrative that I had learned from the John Prine song, which is very much like once there was this really good and beautiful town and it was ruined by these evil coal executives. That is true. It was. But like when the further back you follow it, the more layers there are to that. You know, like I found out only very recently that there was a camp, a winter camp on the Trail of Tears in Muhlenberg County. So it was only like, like each piece of American history is there. It is not a straightforward narrative that there was this paradise, a literal paradise that was lost. Like in some iterations of the story, there was nothing perfect to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where to go from that. It's
Sorry.
just so true though. So you do incorporate a lot of different types of people in the story though, even if it's just briefly. And I feel like in a lot of Southern Gothic that I've read, to be fair, it was old. I've like Flannery O'Connell, Faulkner, like these types of old. They don't include other people. It's just white upper class folks. And it was nice to
I mean, that's who they
see.
were.
Yeah. It was just nice
Like
to see
truly.
somebody like who didn't have a home, who lived in a motel and was like struggling, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a tired or at least a boring argument to be like, you know, turn of the century American writers a
Right.
little bit racist. Like surprise. But
Shocking.
like what? And I think there are some really interesting things going on in a lot of that fiction, and it shouldn't all be just like, incinerated. But I was pretty mindful of trying to write the Kentucky that I lived in, which was less uniform than people think it is. Like, I think if people think about Appalachia or Eastern Kentucky, they think about a sort of noble white poverty, and they have a very specific image in their heads. There's no wealth, there's no um, Native people, there's no Black people, there's no queer people, and these are, I lived there. These were my neighbors and friends. Like, again, it's one of those things where it's not so much like I went in being like, here's my chart and I have to get all of
Right.
my
Yeah.
representation points, as it is like, if I'm gonna write about my home, it'd be very weird to take out my actual experiences of it.
I read a review of someone's book that was set up here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and there's only like 100,000 people up here in a very large area. And this guy was like, I can't believe you included so many Native Americans, and there was a Black cop, and there was a Hispanic man. And I was like, have you been here? Like,
Probably not. Or
ever?
if they have, people manage to self-segregate very, very well. But that's a choice.
It's, you have to just not look though. Like, I was just so frustrated because he gave this book a 1-star review for it. And I was like, it's
And you're like,
fiction
the
though. Like,
problem may be you, in fact. In addition to the fact that like we're writing fiction. So if you were writing, like if you did want to like invent more people, I mean, you read books with dragons and you don't 1-star those, but there's very few dragons running around.
there's a couple though. Like, I think my dogs are actually dragons. Um, so I love that you play with a bunch of different themes. There's like a lot of what's good, what's bad, um, and a lot of like finding oneself or finding family. Was there anything that you really wanted to drive home as one of the main themes in this book?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to. I think one of my problems as a writer is that I'm a little bit bossy, where I'm like, this is the message I want you to take away, and you will not miss it. So at the risk of being didactic, I very much hope that there's a sense that home can be wherever you make it, and that it's not really determined by where you're born. It can be, but that's not like, you have no rights to a place. No one has rights to a place, and it's this um sense of like the people and the love that you find that like makes it your home. And that's obviously just me leaving Kentucky and making a new home with my family.
So it does feel universal though, like this finding your home and finding yourself. But I think my favorite conversation was what is good and what is bad. And how can you enjoy something after you know it was bad? And so that was just like fascinating to me to watch Opal struggle between, oh, well, everybody sucks. Oh, but they were trying to do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, in like a broader historical and like cultural sense, that is a little bit of the experience of being like a white American, is it not? To be like, you grow up, or at least some of us grew up with a particularly kind of welcoming and rosy idea of your place and its history and all that stuff. And to have that slowly undermined by reality is to feel like, but wait, I have all of this love for where I'm from. You know, like I have still now, I have all of this love for Kentucky. And every time I go back, I cry. Um, but it turned out not to be the place I wanted to raise my kids. Um, and at the same time, I have my best friends in all the world have chosen to stay there and raise their kids there. And I think that is equally valid. So I think holding those dichotomies in your head and sort of like the more you know, the harder it is to love something unequivocally, um, is just like part of the experience.
Yeah. And I think in this book, you do a really good job of when each character is telling the story of the Starling House, how they are looking at a particular lens. And you still have Opal, who's like, oh, well, you guys have literally ignored me my whole life and not helped. Um, so why do I care what you say?
Yeah, I realize in writing her that I wasn't really writing the like kind of classic small town book experience where you're like enfolded in the community and you know everyone and you know everyone's business, because she's very much kept on the outside of that. But so was I. And I was still there in Allen County, Kentucky. You know, like my family were politically different. We didn't go to church. You know, my parents were kind of like back to the landerish hippies, very deeply out of place in rural Kentucky, but had gone back to be near their parents. So it was like, you know, in I think first grade, my classmates tried to do an exorcism on me because I didn't go to church and I was like talking too much about Greek gods and stuff. So like I very much experienced the sense that there is this idyllic little small town and you're outside the snow globe.
That it just confounds me, like what children do and what the adults
I mean, they're
like
bored. Like, you got to do
encourage.
something on the playground. I respect that.
True. I mean, if they're gonna try and summon the demon, they should be prepared though. um this small town though, it seems I love that you use Eden as the title for it. Like, oh, it's perfect. It reminds me a lot of like Make America Great Again when we had all these small town jobs and coal um and it just is like, but there are people, even the people who like this town are suffering because of this town.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
it's just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it was very important to me to have at least one character who stayed and at least one character who left, and both of those choices are right.
So I want to talk about a lot of different stuff in the book, but it's really hard because I feel like a lot of it's like spoilery. Um, but you do wonderful at release of information, which has got to be choosy in this type of story. Like, which of the Starling House stories comes first? I can see the like wider perspective being the wider accepted perspective coming first, but after that, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I would have chosen.
Yeah, that actually never changed. The order of those stories was pretty consistent from the beginning, mostly because I like the way I outlined it was like what piece of information would change her opinion at what point. And so those just kind of fell naturally in order.
Well, that works because you're starting with the information that you want released,
Yeah.
which makes much more sense to me than how I write, which is usually, I don't know what's happening. And then there's a lot of revision. So
There's
much revision.
there's always a lot of revision. I truly, I'm a huge outliner. It's detailed, it's beautiful, it's on a chart, and that's just for like a comfort object. Like that has to be changed at least 4 times. Like usually I get to like the halfway point and I'm like, I'm gonna start over now that I understand what I'm writing about. And it's very time consuming. I'm not fast.
You you do tease though, like information. What is an example? Like the letter that Opal finds from Arthur's mom to Arthur, and she holds on to it for a couple pages before reading it, and I'm like, oh, you do know how to torture people.
That's just tricks from like all the books we've read before, right? Like how many times did they do something like that? I love it when a character knows something before the reader does. I rarely am able to pull that off, but I always think it's so clever. Who does that beautifully? Megan Whalen Turner. I don't know if you
Ooh,
read the like Queen of Atolia and
yeah.
the Thief. Like that character always knows more than you, and I think that's fantastic.
So you can see Opal changing her mind before you get to learn why she's changing her mind. And I'm like, I dig this, man. Like I love it so much. Because I'm just like, I still think Arthur's kind of a butthead, you know? Like, why do you think he's relatable now? Opal, tell me, tell me.
I mean, some of us have a weakness for slightly ugly, brooding men, that's a type.
I love that the characters were not perfect. Opal fixates on her crooked teeth and Arthur's shaggy long hair.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I have horribly crooked teeth. You can't see them on Zoom, but they're a wreck. Um, and that's in part, that's two things. First of all, I just find it a little off-putting almost because I read just an incredible amount of romance novels, especially historical romance novels. That is how I cope with my anxiety. They're fantastic and I love them, but every now and then if I read too many in a row, I'm a little off put by the model like perfection of the characters in a way that no longer even seems sexy to me. Like they become just like dolls crashing together in a way that's like not specific and not human and not like I can't even really picture this person. I can picture like a drawing of this person. So that like gets to me. But then the other thing is how much of beauty is just wealth and
yeah.
and access to certain things. And I, even though Arthur is rich, I decided that like brooding weirdos probably aren't going out to like the gym and stuff. So your circumstances shape you and your attractiveness is included in that.
It's just great because even in a lot of like romance novels, they'll be like, she's so unappealing, but here's her long curly red hair and her bright blue eyes and her
Or at some
perfect
point she'll get a
teeth.
makeover, and I wanted
Right.
to be very clear that Opal gets no makeover. She is exactly the dirtbag at the end that she was in the beginning.
It, it's just great. I love seeing somebody who does not put in that much effort. So, are you working on anything new lately?
Yeah, not as fast as I should be at all. Um, I have my next book. It's going to be with Tor. It's another full-length novel. And this one is a result of the fact that I read too many like Lady Night books when I was a formative impressionable child. Too much Tamora Pierce.
There's no
So
too
I feel
much.
like inevitably, eventually, I was always going to write a Lady Night. So this is my Lady Night book, and
Aw.
it's a mess right now because I also thought that's too simple. I should add a time loop. So it's my time travel time loop big sad lady night book.
Oh, that's
A
gonna be
nightmare. It's a
easy,
nightmare. No
super
one should
easy.
ever do time travel because time travel just breaks your plot. There's nothing you can write that is not immediately broken by your stupid time travel device, which you regret ever inventing.
Yeah. Yeah. I did read one good time travel where like it's like a magical ability and this guy can go back to the specific point where he got the ability or like 5 years in the past. It's a fixed point, like, but there's a lot of rules, right? Like he
Yeah. So you
loses
end
a
up
lot of his,
inventing rules because you're like, I got to stop this. This is insane.
I'm not sure how this is possible.
Well, it's not. That's, I mean, I also am comforting myself by the fact that anyone who approaches a time travel novel being like, actually, this would never work, you're like, you're right. Well spotted. So true. It
What
doesn't make
gave it
any sense.
away?
Like,
Well, I'm excited to hear more about the project when it comes a little bit more together.
yeah. The due date is the end of December, so we shall see.
Ooh. Mm.
It's looking like a rough October. Got a lot of like travel and promo stuff to do, so
Can you just
we'll see.
claim time loop and say it's December and like January, February? Sorry, I lost a month. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today about the Starling House book.
It was fantastic. Thanks so much for your questions. They were really great.
I highly recommend the Starling House. It's out October 3rd. Um, it's just it's perfect for this time of year. Like I just love it.
I know. Don't tell anybody. If you actually read it, it is set in spring.
I
But universally, everyone in publishing, everyone on Bookstagram was like, incorrect. This is a fall book.
they don't even touch in fall. It starts in winter, goes to spring, and then it's kind of done.
Correct.
But it's the South fall and winter, or spring and winter, so it feels fall-y. It's fine. Well, thank you again so much. I've had a great time talking with you.
Thanks so much.